See how that works. I don't know what I'm doing.
Well, you never know what those computers.
Usually have somebody handling this for me.
No Amanda today?
No Amanda today. She's off sick.
Oh my.
Yeah. Ask me if she has COVID. Probably.
Everything is COVID now.
Who doesn't these days?
Yeah.
All right. Let's go. Look at that. Look at that. Perfect. So just me now. Wait. Wait. That would be smart. Okay, ready? All right. Good morning, and whoa. Yes, that is me. Excellent. Good. Good morning. Welcome to Beyond the Rail this morning. It is, as I have said in the comments, a bit of a one-man show this morning. Amanda is not available, so please do let me know if everything is super quiet. If you can't hear me, that kind of thing, I will dash up and take care of the problems that exist should they arise. Today's Old Testament reading that we have that I didn't really go into too much in the service this morning is from Isaiah chapter 6, which is the call of Isaiah into ministry in God's work. And like with most everything else that happens in the Old Testament, it revolves around things like themes of conquest and restoration that Isaiah is going to be dealing with. And Isaiah is going to be doing what all the major prophets end up doing, which is to pronounce doom and desolation to the people, which, as Amanda and I have been talking about quite a lot in our Shepcasts, it's a scenario in which we're not really all that used to being a people who need to be restored. Like, we're very used to being a people who are doing just fine and will continue to do just fine forever. We're not used to the idea that we might have to be restored, that things may be wrong and need to be fixed and restored. So let's start with Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through, it's 1 through 13. Let's start on verse 1 of Isaiah chapter 6. Good morning, Garth. Nice to see you. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple, and above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is filled with his glory. The seraphim, the 6-winged seraph, they show up every once in a while in the Bible. We tend to be a little lighter on our angelology than the scriptures would warrant or recommend. The Bible does talk about angels, and they are very rarely what we would assume an angel looks like in the broader cultural understanding. Like, it's very, very rarely just a guy with 2 wings and that's it. You have a situation here where you have the seraphim with 6 wings. 2 covered his face, 2 covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. That's stranger than we would have expected out of what angels would look like. It's not just one guy with 2 big bird wings coming out of his back. There are 6 wings here for sure. And they are singing, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Those are words that should sound at least semi-familiar to you, because they are things that you would have expected to find in that hymn that we had this morning at the 8:30 service, Holy, Holy, Holy. Why are we saying holy 3 times? Well, hopefully because there's 3 members of the Trinity, and they're all holy. Rolling right along. The foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, for I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Yeah, you've got to know and understand that when people encounter the living God, they are immediately and acutely aware of their own deficiencies. Like those get spelled out right away. And I'll explain what I mean. So the Olympics are on right now. I haven't watched even a single second of them, but the Olympics are on right now. And the Winter Olympics have in them hockey and curling and figure skating and ice dancing and that kind of thing. Now, you or I may assume that we can skate okay, we can get by all right, but none of us, unless somebody from the Olympics is watching this, are Olympic level or Olympic caliber athletes. That is the best of the best in the entire world. It's crazy. And even if you think that you can sprint or run relatively well, you'll change your tune when you encounter the magnificence of like the top of their game Olympic athletes who are just like at the best of their best. If you can ski okay, but then you see the almost superhuman things that they do when they are doing the downhill skiing or the moguls or that kind of thing. It's bananas. You or I would, first of all, not be able to do those things. That's well enough understood. But secondly, you and I would be instantly aware of our mediocrity when exposed to people who are insanely good. What people need to understand about the living God is that he is something that is in every way immeasurably superior to ourselves. Like in every way. When he fills up the temple, Isaiah begins to be acutely aware of his own inadequacies in a way that he might not have been before. Like he obviously knew, as we all do, oh yes, I'm a sinful man. Yeah, we know. But it's only upon encountering the Lord his God that he says, whoa, oh boy, my sinfulness is a big deal. It's a bigger deal than I thought it was. It's more of a crisis than it is anything else. And his acknowledgement of his sinfulness, his understanding that he says, I'm a sinful man, I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell amongst a people of unclean lips. He is also aware of his inadequacy to remove that sinfulness. Right? Like he's well aware of the fact that he has committed sins, yes. That he would like to stop committing sins, yes. But he is also dependent on God for that forgiveness of sins to come. Right? Anything else that he could or would try, because Isaiah probably, and I'm basing this on conjecture, I don't know for sure, but he's in the temple. Why is he in the temple? Why is anybody in the temple? The temple exists as the space to offer up sacrifices, right? That's what that's there for. And if the temple is there for you to offer up sacrifices, it's a space that's there for you to have your sin and your guilt removed. But Isaiah isn't recalling any one particular sin. Like he's not saying to himself, I have sinned in the following ways. He just says that he is a man of unclean lips. He says that I myself am a man whose lips are unclean. I'm going to say things that I don't want to say. Anything specific? Yeah, lots, but nothing specific right now. It's not as though Isaiah is a good man who just needed to have one particular sin taken away. He understands himself and his words as being things that are essentially corrupt. That's not to say every single word he says is bad, because of course, even if we were to go to something like Mussolini, for example, he made the promise that he wanted to make the trains run on time. Now, say what you will about Mussolini, thank you, I will. You can't say that having the trains run on time is a bad thing. Like, you don't have to say, well, I mean, everything Mussolini said was bad, therefore making the trains run on time was a real problem. Like, no, making the trains run on time is fine. That's a fine thing to want. The trains should run on time. That doesn't mean that he's a good guy by nature, but it means that not everything he says is bad and corrupt just by virtue of him saying it. It's the same way here with Isaiah. He understands himself as being a man of unclean lips and dwelling amongst a people of unclean lips. Yes, good, true, that's what happens. And in order for that problem, because it's not a problem if he just said one bad thing one time, he is a man of unclean lips. In order for that problem to go away, it's going to have to be bigger than just God ignoring what he says every once in a while. It's going to have to be a matter of God cleansing him, which is what happens with the burning coal here. God cleanses Isaiah and takes away not just, well, we'll read that now. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth and said, "Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned for." In that moment, it's not a matter of like God ignoring what Isaiah does. He goes in there and says, now not just is your sin atoned for, but but your sin is taken away, and your guilt, the things that you're carrying around with you, are atoned for. So not just do you have a situation in which the individual sins are taken away, which they are, the sin is atoned for, but also the guilt attached to the sin is taken away as well. So like that's different than God ignoring the sinfulness of one or many particular people. That's a matter of God openly removing the guilt away from the attachment of the sinfulness. So if I can make an analogy here, and it'll be a pretty rough one, but you know how every once in a while in the United States they still have the death penalty, we don't up here. And so when somebody is sentenced to death, even though the family of the murdered victim may forgive the murderer, they may desire and want clemency for them, that kind of thing, but ultimately their guilt remains, and according to the U.S. legal system, they still have to be punished, even if they have been forgiven by God and forgiven by people, that kind of thing. The guilt is attached to them and can't be removed through mortal means. Versus or contrasting this with the presence of these angels in Isaiah, these seraphim who touch his mouth with this coal, and then they say, "And now your sin is atoned for and your guilt is taken away." The sin is gone and the guilt is gone, back to back. These are things that happen in the real world and happen very rapidly. And then in verse 8, I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And then I said, "Here am I, send me." Once Isaiah has had his sin and his guilt taken away, then he's happy to go. Then he is happy to go and proclaim the message of God. Before that, he won't. Before that, he'll say, "I'm a man of unclean lips, dwelling amongst a people of unclean lips. I am a sinner by nature. I cannot do the work of sharing the gospel. Can't be done. I am not up to that task." But once his sin has been taken away, like once his guilt has been blotted out, then he is perfectly capable of doing that task, because he is somebody who understands himself as a sinner who has been forgiven. That right there would be a key part in discussing anything about God and life and salvation, anything like that. The beginning point for the Christian must be to understand ourselves as people who have been forgiven, and then we can talk about it more after that. You can't start with anything else. You can't start with the position, and it would be a strange one. You can't start with the position that says, God is here to forgive sins, and I don't need him to do that because I've never had any. That's a very strange approach to have for a Christian, to say that God is in the forgiveness of sins business, but nice people like me don't have any sins to be forgiven. Isaiah can only go into the world to proclaim the message of God as somebody who has seen the possibility of the wrath of God and has been forgiven of his sin and his guilt. Anything else isn't going to work. And, well, we're going to get into that in a second. In verse 9, And he said, go and say to this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy, and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts and turn and be healed. Then I said, how long, O Lord? And he said, until cities lie waste without inhabitant and houses without people, and the land is a desolate waste, and the Lord removes people far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land. And though a tenth remain in it, it will be burned again, like a terebinth or an oak whose stump remains when it is felled, and the holy seed is its stump. The nature of the call of an Old Testament prophet is one in which you're going to be going out and saying very unpopular things to people that don't want to hear it. But you're going to have two choices, right? Like, you can either understand your sinfulness in a time when somebody like Isaiah is going to proclaim it to you, when somebody like Isaiah is going to go into the larger world and denounce you for being sinful people and tell you to return to God. Or you can wait until you encounter God in his fullness and majesty. One way or another, you will understand your sinfulness. Like, you will either accept that admonition from Isaiah and say, well, maybe we should change our ways pretty quick. Or you can trust your luck and wait until you see God face to face and see what happens then. But one way or another, you will become acutely aware of your own sinfulness. Good morning, Adeline. One way or another, you will become acutely, keenly aware of your own sinfulness in a way that will be unmistakable. But it's a matter of when you want to do that and how. In what Isaiah would want is to proclaim your sinfulness to you in a way that spares you from the wrath that is to come, in a way in which you are allowed to have that Lord God take away your sin and your guilt like he did with Isaiah. Fantastic. But there's a good chance people won't do that. There's a good chance people will say of Isaiah and of his message, what need do we have of this? Given that, good morning, Joan. Given that we are people who do not need God's forgiveness and grace and salvation, because we aren't people who do things wrong, well, then Isaiah is going to have a very hard time making inroads there. But it doesn't change the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation is and always has been that people from all the way from King Uzziah, all the way down to Isaiah, are people who aren't doing what God wants them to do, and only God can forgive their sins and cleanse them from it. And anything else is going to lead to you facing God on your own merits. And I wouldn't recommend it. I really wouldn't recommend it. That's probably not the best idea for you to have, especially when God is freely and openly offering to remove your sin and guilt. This part here, where it says, go and say to this people, keep on hearing but do not understand, keep on seeing but do not perceive, make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy, and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn and be healed. This reminds me a lot of hard-hearted Pharaoh from the book of Exodus, in which Pharaoh kept on hardening his heart and said, I will not let this people go, over and over and over again, no matter what he was faced with, no matter what kind of curse or plague or miracle he had just encountered. He hardened his heart and would not let the people go, even up to and including when the people of Israel left, Pharaoh went to go and try and get them back. Even after he'd seen even the death of the firstborn, he still, like, his heart was hard enough to go back after these people to try and return them. Sure, you're looking at a situation where the hardness of the heart of the people essentially requires them to be broken in some way. And I'll explain what I mean. That if the good people of Israel were just to hear and understand that they had sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and then return to him, you're going to have a situation in which the people of Israel are going to have to be brought low. They're going to have to be humbled in some way beyond what they would want, which is a curious, sad irony, because you would always hope that if you just get what you want out of God, then you'll believe in him. But that's not the way it goes. Usually it goes the way of, if I get everything I want, then I will no longer have any need or requirement for God at all. He no longer factors into my situation. I'm not interested. Good morning, Marlene. I have no interest in God because, of course, I have all I need. God does not enter into this. Meanwhile, whereas you see an encounter in these readings that these hearts and these eyes are going to have to be blind and stopped up to the point that eventually the cities are going to lie waste without inhabitant and houses without people, and the land being a desolate waste, and the people being removed far away. That's when the people of Israel return to God, is when that happens. They don't do it before. They refuse to do so. What they do, and it's a very tiresome thing, what they will do over and over and over again is they will say, effectively, I have what I need. I have no need for God. I will go and I will worship other gods and I'll follow after them. That's going to be what I do. Fine. And even though God sends warning after warning and prophet after prophet to them, ultimately it is not until they've had everything slapped out of their hands that they are even prepared to accept God again at all, even as a concept, even as a prospect. You see this happening in the book of Judges and Kings and Samuel, like over and over and over again, where you have people who have everything they need, everything's taken care of, they have all the riches and goodness of God, and they insist on not following him. And God sends messenger after messenger and prophet after prophet to them, and they keep on ignoring those prophets and or killing them and or removing them. And it's only after God has removed everything else from them. It's only after God has removed everything else from their hands and given them nothing else to distract them, then they return to God. And this happens time and time again. You can chart this through the scriptures where people will rebel against God, they will get cast into exile, and then while they're in exile, they'll say, we had it pretty good back when we believed in God and had faith in him and observed his word. That was pretty good. And then they get restored, and then they go back to normal again, and that continues until things get too good and they fall away again. Is there a possibility that could happen here? Sure, why not? Why wouldn't there be? We, at least in a material sense, have it better than anybody else has ever had it in human history, ever. We really do. Like, socially, spiritually, we can talk about that, but at least in like physical, material stuff, we have it better than anybody else has ever had it. The vast majority of people who have ever lived quite short, brutal lives, really. Like, and you don't even have to go back that far to find stories of people who effectively did not have indoor plumbing. Like, how far back do you have to go? Like, what, to your parents' generation, your grandparents? How far do you have to go back before somebody talks about having a party line? Yeah, there you go, right? Where they like ring something specific because you all have the party line. Fine.
Party line.
Sorry?
A 7 party.
A 7 party line. What a thrill. And that would happen.
We have telephones here in Spring Valley. They hadn't had telephones very long.
No. And now, so we've gone, and that was in your lifetime. We've gone from that to everybody having a phone in their pocket all the time.
Yes.
That's a heck of an adjustment within one human lifetime. But here we are, right? Like, and these things move very quickly. We are people who are people of extreme material comfort, and you will find that in a world of extreme material comfort, people don't got a lot of time for God. They say, well, I have everything I need. I have skipped the dishes. I have my phone in my pocket. I've got hot and cold running distractions all day. I've got all the food and all the luxury that I could possibly want. I eat better than King Solomon in all of his glory. I can drive between Regina to Calgary, Alberta in a day. It's a journey that would have been so difficult in a lifetime, most people would have never taken it, because most people spent their entire lives in a very narrow space around where they were born, like most people did. And you know how you can tell that, by the way, is because like the older countries on earth, like the countries, so like we're a relatively young country, 150 something years, quite young. But for like older countries like England or something like that, or the United States, for example, older countries like that have much different accents than we do. Have you noticed that the accent for people here is much the same as the accent for people in like Calgary, Alberta? Pretty close, by and large. Yeah, I know you say bunny hug here and you call it Calgary, but it's very close to being the same thing. Contrast that, take that same amount of space, that same distance, and chart that in England, let's say. And you'd have the difference between like a Manchester accent and like a Liverpool accent. They're very different. Or a like London accent and a Glasgow accent. They're so different, even though that space is relatively small. Like England is not that big. The United Kingdom is not that big. But you have the English and the Scots and the Irish and the Welsh and all these people who have these very, very, very different languages. And the whole reason they had those is because for most of their history, those people were like born, lived, and died, and like literally never left their village. Ever. They would just stay in their village. They would be born there, live there, grow up there, die there, and never have departed that. Meanwhile, right now, we think nothing of driving in a day a distance more than most people would have gone in a lifetime. Very easy to do that. You can drive from Regina to Saskatoon very easily. For most of Great Britain's experience, nobody would have ever gone that far. Not really. You would have been confined to your city, your town, your village, and you never would have gone that far. 200 kilometers away, whole world's not that big, they would have said. It's crazy. So yeah, we have these kinds of luxuries right now, which gives us a lot of distractions and which serves to distract us from God himself. We don't think about him that much because we're too busy about thinking about everything else. And in a sense, every once in a while when we get this distracted, and I wish we didn't have to do it, by the way. Nobody wishes more than me that we weren't required to be broken and humbled like this to return to God. I wish genuinely that we could just understand, return to God and appreciate and acknowledge him while still enjoying his blessings, but it never seems to work that way. It always seems to work that after planes hit towers, then all of a sudden people care about God again, right? Then they say, well, time to go back to church. Yeah, okay. After somebody dies, people say, well, time to go back to church now. Yeah, okay. You shouldn't have to. Like, I understand why you do, but you shouldn't have to. It shouldn't be a circumstance in which you and I only return to God after everything is ruined and despoiled. There should be a way for us to go back to him while things are still fine and good. And we can still do that anytime. We can all still do that at literally any time. It's not that hard. The only thing stopping us, of course, is ourselves and the fact that we say, well, we don't really want to do that because we're too busy. We've got lots going on. I think, like in my own personal estimation of this, the biggest one of these is Christmas. You know Christmas? Yeah, you know Christmas. Christmas is a day in which everything is shut. Like, it's very difficult to go to very many stores on Christmas Day. Most of them are closed. You can't go to Costco on Christmas Day. Forget it. It's closed. All right, that's all closed. And you can't really go down to the local pub or whatever. That's probably closed too. And you have a situation in which most everything is closed, and it's a day that literally has the name of Jesus Christ in the day. And still, people are still too busy for God then. Like, that's a day in which all distractions should, in theory, be removed, And all we did was add as many distractions as we possibly could. Right? Like literally everything at that point was removed. You were given a day off. You were given the day specifically to recognize and acknowledge the birth of Jesus Christ in the manger in Bethlehem. The whole world essentially stops at that moment. You can't really go do much of anything else. And all we did was fill that time with other things. All we did was cram that time full of everything else other than God. It's not a matter of us saying, once we get what we want out of God, then we'll worship him. It has never worked that way. It has never worked that way. It never will work that way. We are a people who must be acknowledging and remembering God when things are good as well as when they're bad. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a situation where things will get bad in order for things to be slapped out of your hand. God wants to spare you from the wrath that is to come. And sometimes the only way of him doing that is to give you the wrath here. And I wish he didn't have to do that. But that's the way that things tend to go in the scriptures. And that's the way that things tend to go in life as well. And you all know about that. You've all seen that. You've all seen the uptick of faith when somebody has a crisis or a tragedy, and then they'll turn back to God, right? Like they've had a really bad time either in like a macro level or a micro. Then they'll return to God. They've had a disease, or they've had an illness or a death in the family, or they've had economic ruin or something like that. Then they return to God. That God was always there. He was there in the good times as well, just you didn't think about him that much. That's the bad news. The good news is, as it says in the scriptures, return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and abounding in steadfast love. It's never too late to return to God. Like there's no such thing as too late to return to him. While you still draw breath, you can always return to him. Now, and he will always receive you when you return. The parable of the workers in the vineyard is a great one for that, where he hires people at the start of the day, promises them a denarius, and then he hires people at the 3rd hour, at the 6th hour, at the 9th hour, and then at the 11th hour. So there are people who only work 1 hour, and they get paid the same as everybody else. And those who started work at the start of the day get mad, and they complain. They say, well, that's not fair. That's not fair that we get paid the same as those who only showed up for 1 hour, and we who have borne all the heat of the day only got a denarius as well. And the master says, are you receiving what you were promised? Then take what is yours and go. Or are you angry because I am generous? Part of the job for us in the church is not to get angry at the generosity of Christ. Part of our job in the church is to let God be God and let him be as generous as he is going to be, which is quite generous. And to understand that he's going to call people back to faith and to repentance. They're going to have to go through unpleasant things to get there. Probably they shouldn't have to. And our job in the church is not to tisk them and say, well, how dare you come back this late in the day? No, it's good that they do. It's always good and profitable and wonderful the prodigal son's return. Always a good thing. It's what we want. The prodigal son shouldn't have to go and squander his inheritance and want to eat the pods that the pigs were eating. He shouldn't have to be impoverished like that. He should just stay with his older brother. He didn't. He should have, but he didn't. And if that's what it takes for him to return to his father and to understand how good things were the whole time, then that's what it takes. And we're a stubborn, stiff-necked people. We have been from the beginning. This is not new. This is all the way through the Old Testament. This happens over and over and over again. People have it too good. They reject God. Then they are returned. It shouldn't have to be that way, but it is that way. And I wish it wasn't. So, again, 2 jobs for us as existent Christians. Number 1, that we would welcome people back no matter when they return. And number 2, that we would not wait for things to get bad. Things don't have to get bad for you to return and acknowledge God. You can say grace before meals when you're about to enjoy a banquet, instead of calling out to God and saying, God, where are you, when you're trying to eat the pods the pigs are eating, right? Like, God is there in both circumstances if you have the eyes to hear and the eyes to see and the ears to hear, as Isaiah is talking about. That you have the chance for your eyes to see and your ears to hear what God does. Any questions either in the chat or from those who are in person? Because I have several things to do this morning in a level of panic that is unmistakable. All right. Seeing nothing, thanks for joining us this morning. Beyond the Rail, I'll see most of you in about 25 minutes from now. And we will end live video. Boink.